highway stretched out in front of James, a long, dark ribbon of asphalt cutting through endless miles of nothing. He gripped the wheel tighter, his fingers stiff from the cold, his knuckles pale against the dim glow of the dashboard lights. He hadn't meant to be driving this late. The trip was supposed to be a quick afternoon run and pick up the spare car part for his dad's old truck and head straight back. But the shop had been slow, and then there had been the wrong part. And now, somehow, it was past midnight, and he was alone on Route 6, a back road that barely deserved the name. The GPS had cut out an hour ago. The road signs were few and far between, and when they did appear, they were rusted, the lettering barely visible. James told himself he wasn't lost, just taking the long way home. The only thing accompanying him was the steady hum of his tires against the cracked pavement, and the faint static from the radio. An old habit of his, keeping it on even when the signal was dead. It made the silence feel less empty. Then, in his headlights, a shape appeared on the shoulder. A figure. James' foot eased off the gas. A woman stood just beyond the reach of the beams, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, head bowed. Her dark clothing blended into the night, making her almost invisible, except for her pale face and long, loose hair that swayed slightly in the wind. James swallowed. He wasn't the kind of person to leave someone stranded, but something about her made his stomach twist. Maybe it was the way she didn't move, not even when his headlights washed over her. Still, his foot hovered over the brake. Keep driving. The thought was sharp, insistent. It didn't feel like his own. His hands stayed steady on the wheel as he passed her. For a split second, she lifted her head. Her eyes caught the light. James' chest tightened. There was something wrong with her face. The angles were too sharp. The skin too smooth. Like a mask pulled too tight over bone. And her eyes, whatever they weren't right. Then she was gone, swallowed by the dark as his taillights carried him forward. James exhaled a shaky breath, his fingers aching from how hard he was gripping the wheel. His pulse hammered in his throat. It was just a trick of the light, just some woman, probably lost. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The road stretched on, curving gently between hills. He tried to push the image from his mind. The woman. The way her face didn't seem to belong to her. A mile passed. Then another. Then, in his headlights, she was there again. Standing on the shoulder. His heart stopped. His mind couldn't make sense of it. He hadn't turned. Hadn't doubled back. It was impossible. James slammed his foot against the gas pedal. The engine roared, the car lurching forward. He didn't care if it was a trick or a coincidence. He just needed to be away from her. The road blurred under him. His hands were slick on the wheel. He counted the seconds in his head, forcing himself to focus. 1 mile. 2. 3. His breath slowed. Maybe it had been in his head. Maybe he was just tired, seeing things that weren't there. But then, in the distance, a shape, waiting just beyond the reach of his headlights. His vision tunneled. His stomach lurched. It was her. Again, standing in the exact same spot. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He could only drive, and as he passed, she lifted her head and smiled. James didn't remember the last time he had blinked. His eyes burned, his hands locked on the wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. The woman had been there again, the exact same posture, the same unnatural stillness, the same horrifying face. No one could move that fast. No one could be in multiple places at once. This road wasn't right. He pressed harder on the gas. The speedometer crept past 80, then 90. He didn't care. He just needed to leave. The road stretched endlessly ahead. The same cracked pavement. The same dead trees lining the shoulder like skeletal spectators. The GPS still refused to load. No streetlights, no side roads, no mile markers. Just more of the same. And then his headlights caught something ahead. James' chest tightened. No. She was there again. standing in the same place. His foot jammed the brake. The tires screamed against the asphalt. The car skidding, fishtailing wildly before shuddering to a stop. His breathing was ragged, his hands shaking. He refused to look at her. But the second he exhaled, something tapped against his window. James' body locked up. The knock was slow, deliberate, just 2 fingers against the glass. Tap, tap. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The cabin felt too small, the air thick, suffocating. He didn't want to look, but he had to. With excruciating slowness, he turned his head. The woman stood inches from his window. Her face was wrong. It was too smooth, too perfect. Like something imitating human skin, but not quite understanding how it should move. And her eyes black, bottomless pits stared through him. She smiled. James' body acted before his mind. He threw the car into reverse. The tires shrieked as he jerked the wheel, spinning the car around so violently his shoulders slammed into the door. The moment his headlights swept over the road, she was in front of him again. James screamed. He didn't think. He hit the gas. The woman didn't move. She stood in the center of the road, waiting. At the last second, James wrenched the wheel. The car veered, tires catching the loose gravel on the shoulder. The vehicle fishtailed, and for a breathless moment, he thought he was going to flip. Then suddenly, he was driving again. James didn't dare check the mirror. The road stretched on, and he focused on one thing. Get off this highway, find an exit, a town, anything. He drove for what felt like forever. The gas gauge dipped lower, but he didn't slow down. His hands were sore, his throat dry, and then, finally, a green exit sign appeared in the distance. James nearly sobbed with relief. He didn't care where it led. It was a way out. The moment he reached the turnoff, he yanked the wheel and slammed the brakes. His stomach dropped. The exit led to nothing. No ramp, no town, no intersecting road. Just a dead stretch of dirt leading into a black abyss of trees. It wasn't real. James' vision swam. His pulse thundered in his ears. And then, from the rearview mirror, there was movement. A figure sat in the back seat. James froze. The engine died. The darkness swallowed everything. And James finally understood. There was no way off this road.